Joe, we go up to Seattle. It's funny because we just got done talking about Kalen DeBoer. When we go up to Seattle in another one of these deep dives, we go to the Washington Huskies. As I always do because I'm a polite person, I'm going to let you start off first here. What do you think about this upcoming year's team for the Washington Huskies?
Washington fans, please remember before I say any of this, that I am a big fan of you guys. I have been nothing but supportive of you. So don't get upset at me. I'm just the messenger. Okay. Don't shoot the messenger in this situation. I think Washington fans are one of the few fan bases in sports that are realistic of expectations. Okay. They are replacing not only one of the better coaches in the sport in Kalen DeBoer, but they're also ripped apart for depth because of DeBoer leaving and killed at most of their key important starting positions because of who was just drafted. And I'm referring to the obvious ones. Michael Penix, Roma Dunze, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Braylon Trice, Roger Rosengarten, Troy Fotanu, Edu Olafosio, Dominique Hampton, Devin Culp, and Dylan Johnson.
So they're going to suck.
That's like your whole starting lineup. All I'm just trying to say here is that we need to understand that Jedd Fisch is a fantastic coach. I think he is a brilliant, brilliant coach that is going to put Washington eventually in a position to be consistently competitive and competing for Big Ten championships. But this is going to be a bridge year. There is a lot of work that needs to be figured out. That's the simplest way to put it before I get to a projection.
So I agree with everything you just said in reference to Joe. They got so many question marks, and I don't think that they just have question marks on players that will be there and players that they got from the portal. I also don't know what their defensive staff is going to show me, right? I mean, like, look, man, there's a different way to call games. There's a different way to coach. There's a different way to teach from the NFL than it is in college football. I do think that Belichick's defense is going to be interesting to watch. You know, I think it's an interesting hire. I think he fits the culture like in Seattle. I mean, like, remember the goofy memes of him with his tongue out and all that stuff? The dude just loves, breathes football. I get all that.
Yeah.
The question becomes for me, Joe, is how much when you have to replace, can you be realistic on what your expectations can be? But I got to admit something, man. I don't know if they're not a little bit better than some are expecting them to be. And you have you have poo-pooed on this guy. I'm not going to. Joe, I'm really intrigued by Will Rogers.
I'm stunned, man. Like you're so out on you've been so out on Washington for so long, and it just takes one SEC guy to just bring you in. There's an SEC guy on the roster. Washington's gonna be good. They got Will Rogers. I'm just giving you shit.
What was I out on with Washington last year?
I'm giving you a hard time.
I was out on their secondary. They were ranked 113th on average.
You picked against them every single time that we had a big game for them.
I picked against them twice. I picked them against Oregon. I picked Oregon twice.
And did you not pick USC? You might have picked USC.
I might have.
And you picked Utah.
No, remember, I learned my lesson at the end of the year. Remember?
All right, but I'm giving you a hard time. I'm just laughing at the fact that suddenly Will Rogers.
When I said their secondary sucked, and their secondary did suck. Okay.
I'm just laughing at the fact that suddenly there's an SEC guy and you're all in now.
Well, I think what's happened here, this is where I was trying to get at. What I think happened was that Will Rogers had such a bad head coach. Joe, they legitimately, this is not a joke. Zach Arnett literally went from a 12 personnel type of offense to the air raid, literally from 1 week to the next. That 1,000% happened. I think Will Rogers is a pretty good college quarterback because he makes right decisions. I do think that Fisch is going to put him in very favorable situations. Very favorable. Which leads me to the question of, look, you bring in Jeremiah Hunter, the receiver. You do have Giles Jackson. You do have Denzel Boston that will be there. Some younger guys that stuck around. You do have a true freshman and Justice Williams coming in. You do have Jonah Coleman, okay, who also comes in at running back. I don't think that they're going to be as bad as some people are expecting them to be. I just don't. I think offensively they might be okay. But, Joe, here's the problem that I have.
Yeah.
I have no idea what their offensive line is going to look like.
Yeah, they lost Parker Brailsford. They lost both of their tackles, Fotanu and Rosengarten, to the draft. So this isn't. It's kind of similar to very similar situation to Oklahoma, where you've got an offensive line that you're hitting a little bit of a reset button on, and you're stepping into a new conference where you have to be ready to go to war in the trenches.
Mm-hmm.
We're not sitting here saying panic button, you're going to get your ass kicked. All we're saying here is it's a question mark. This could go really poorly or it could be completely fine. And when you're hitting this reset button at a key important position, it tends to lead to problems. And it's the same thing could be said on the defensive line as well.
Look, I look at their schedule too. All right. I really don't know, if I'm being honest. Look, I think in the beginning of the season, it's pretty favorable for them. I think that, Joe, we can look up in the first quarter through the season. They play Weber State, they play Eastern Michigan, they play Washington State, they play Northwestern. Joe, there's a highly likelihood. And then they got to go all the way to Jersey, which I do think, look, you're going to continue to make fun of me on this. Going across the country, okay, I think it's going to be a big deal for some of these teams.
There's a 4-hour time difference.
Okay, blow me. I've never been in the Eastern time zone but once. Okay, so I can't believe I just said blow me. Okay, but there is a likelihood, Joe, going into Michigan on October the 5th, that the Huskies are 5-0. And we are going to talk about Michigan in these deep dives. Joe, are you 1,000% confident that we know that what we have in Michigan? Now, I believe that Michigan can beat them. I think Michigan has more talent than them. Joe, they kind of have a favorable a favorable schedule here. In the beginning part of this, they do get Penn State late. They do have USC, but they have Oregon at the end of the season. Joe, I look at this, and I could see a scenario where they're 9-3, though.
I think you bring up the really good point in terms of their schedule. It's not an easy schedule, but they do get a soft landing by having a very easy opening stretch. So the first 5 games,
pretty gnarly too. That back end's kind of gnarly.
I think that they get chewed up on the back end. You mentioned the games that like really stood out to me is Michigan. I'm a little wary about what happens against USC. Penn State, going to Penn State, I think is going to be a really hard game for them. And Oregon, I think Oregon is going to be so pissed off after last year that they're going to be coming out with a vengeance, knowing that the importance of beating them and what it's going to mean for their national championship hopes. At Iowa, too, I think that is always just the vacuum in space that you step into. It's a black hole. You just kind of disappear for 4 hours and you don't know what's going to happen. That could be a game that you get chewed up and spit out and lose because they're just going to drag you down to their level because you're playing at Iowa.
Well, and I think, too, there, to your point, the next week they go to Indiana. So, like, I'm not saying that there's trap games, but, Joe, you're talking about going on the road at a pretty far distance twice in 2 weeks, right? And by the way, in the entire month, okay, so in a 4-game span, at Rutgers, Michigan at home, at Iowa, at Indiana. So, like, you look at USC and say, okay, well, yeah, they could beat USC. I could see that. But, Joe, for the entire last month, they've had more miles than anybody. They have traveled more than anybody in the country. A lot
of travel.
That's a lot of travel there. So, Joe, like, I look at that November 2nd game versus USC, shit. Like, I mean, buddy, like, there comes a point where, like, I could see if it's just on paper that Washington is 9-3. I can also look in paper and say, man, the month of October is brutal for them for just travel alone, not necessarily the teams. Indiana's not better than them. Iowa offensively, which, by the way, is still ranked 71st on the new college football 25 game, which I think is freaking awesome. Can Iowa score? But is their defense going to be really good? Yeah. Joe, that month of October for them is
hard.
It's going to be brutal, dude. So I just want to say, I think 9-3 is their ceiling. Buddy, I'm going to say 6-6, 7-5 could be the floor. If they get through October, though, if they go 3-1 in October, okay, I think they're set up for success because in November, brother, you got Penn State and Oregon. And you got to go to those places, both of those places. You better be really good in October because in November, that is a brutal stretch down the hall.
I'm going to narrow my projection a little bit more than yours.
Okay.
I think floor is 7-5, ceiling's 8-4. I think that I'm
sorry.
Floor is 7-5, ceiling is 8-4. I'm hyper focused, and for some reason, a lot of college football fans, when we brought this up with Arizona, they don't want to come to terms with this being as important as it is. But depth is the most important thing in the sport. You could have a really good team, really good starters, but if you don't have good depth, you are going to get chewed up by the end of the season. I think that Jedd Fisch in year 2 is going to be a huge year for them. Like I think that we're going to be talking about them after recruiting, after what they do in the transfer portal. We're going to be talking about them as a big time Big Ten championship contender. I really, truly believe that. But like, we got to be prepared, Washington fans, that this is going to be not as exciting as 2024. And just because it starts slow does not mean your team is going to be bad. This is a hard conference to win in, and you were given a pretty tough opening schedule. So very similar to Oklahoma.
7-5, 8-4. I'm assuming Oregon, Penn State.
I see Oregon, Penn State, Michigan. I think those are the 3 games that are just going to be too difficult to win because they're deeper. They've got more established coaching staffs, except for Michigan somewhat. But again, they're deeper. You know, they have more strings of recent success and all that stuff. That's going to be hard for them.
So then who are the other 2 teams that you think they're going to beat them?
Iowa and USC.
That's fair.
And I think that you could split those games. You could win both of them, and you could go 9-3. But I don't think that.
I think they can even get upset by like Indiana. Like, I know you're going to laugh at me about that. Joe, think about this. It's
not off base. It's not.
I mean, you live in LA, okay, and Seattle in the same proximity in reference to Western time zone. Joe, how far is that New Jersey flight?
God, got to be 7 hours.
Okay, so think about this. You got a 7-hour flight there, a 7-hour flight back. You turn right around, you got another 5-hour flight to Indiana, a 5-hour flight back.
6.5 nonstop, but I would assume.
Well, if they got
charter, it's a little quicker.
Yeah.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your #1 source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.